check, 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yeah.
But he's got to wait. Yeah, the TIA. Thanksgiving.
Oh, really?
Jeez. And he's got to be 6 months post that.
What kind of time frame they give?
May or June.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what this is.
They're not, speakers not plugged in.
Good, good. Almost. Just take it back.
Don't do it yet because you gotta. Here we go. You need to get to the controls for the audio because
We'll take one. You just start with the podium. I can hook up the rest as we go. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, check 1, 2. Oh, what happened to it? There it is. Test 1, 2. This is pretty average sound. Pat, can you tell if it's coming from the speaker? The remote speaker next to you? Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I'll just keep talking. Let me know when you have enough level. And And I still have to hook up the wireless lapel, and the wireless hand mic is already built in. The receiver is built into this amplifier, so that'll just take me a second. I'll just walk over and do it. And here it is, and it is not on yet. There it is. Okay, here's the wireless hand mic. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll check the lapel last. I still have to hook it up. So, level's good? Okay. What's that? Ah.
Testing. Hello. Today is January 30th. We are testing the audio for the live stream. Know there's about a 2-minute delay. So in 2 minutes, you'll hear my voice. Listen closely. In 2 minutes, get out. No.
Check, check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Test. Whoa, there we are. Okay, this is the lapel. Lapel mic. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lapel mic. Sounds pretty comparable. Test. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see what kind of portal we open by getting too close to everything. The process of putting it in. Yeah. Test 1, 2. It's good, right? Is this 2 minutes? It's a 2-minute delay, really? No, it doesn't reach. Are we completely committed to this lesser location? Yeah. Okay, I'll just extend this. That's okay. I just need a little bit more of this. This is not just enough. It's okay.
Testing. Hello. Can I hear myself? I don't know. We'll find out.
Do you remember last week you did laptop here?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm still not hearing myself. Can I hear myself? I don't know. We'll find out. It's better. I was okay for a minute. now it's,
It's this thing. It's the buzz. It's the microphone. So, once I get this, I think that's contributing to it. So let me finish. Let me turn it on plus.
Yeah, I bet you know.
I'm not even sure, but they usually do have some kind of sound, right? Test 1, 2.
Hello, I'm Patrick Stewart. Did you know that right now over 70
Do you have frequency? That's better. Just the angle that this gooseneck sits at, it makes it sensitive, like you're tuning it to different frequencies. You can't real-time monitor it from this system? Because that sounds like it's, you might have an impedance issue. Let me try it over here. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so what's the impedance it's set to on the TriCaster? Could that be it? What's that? Oh, it's all, no, but with this, the output, that's, the output coming from this, so that's the camera processing. I'll test it again. I'll test all 3 mics. I'll try all 3.
Amanda, is this okay? Now it sounds good? What happens if I get higher pitch? Because I feel like when you were doing the frequency thing, that's when it freaked out. I guess, I don't know.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Does it?
Yeah, oh no, I didn't change anything.
It almost didn't even sound like
Oh,
analog.
does it? Oh, I just heard a pop.
It didn't sound like over modulation. It sounded like digital distortion, like gremlin style.
That's bad. That mic is bad. That's what it is. Yeah, that's
Test 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, it sounds really good through the PA system, and it's a direct, try through the headphones. Really shouldn't sound different. It's very, very strange that it would do that. Test 1, 2. Sounds good? All right, and I guess that'll show up eventually.
Yep.
And it's totally, it's just about loud. It's not even like this. I have to bring it up. See, this amp doesn't.
And Amanda, this is all plugged in?
There's only one output.
Right. Well, last week we were like, why are we not getting audio? And this wasn't pushed in all the way.
Yeah.
So,
Like, in other words, it's
right.
all one audio source. So for it to
All right. I have to move this stuff a little bit. Yeah, this sounds great.
That's still running, right? Okay, I'm going to do all 3 mics. Okay, I'm currently at the lectern. This is the lectern gooseneck mic, and I've got all 3 mics on currently, so if there's anything electronic or concerning the wireless signal, it's really high on this one. Okay. You can't? Okay. There's only one output from here, and it can't be padded or anything. So this is the gooseneck. This is the hand mic. This is currently on, and this is the lapel mic. This is the lapel mic by itself.
I think it was just too high.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for being here for the second installment of Innovation Engagement, our speaker series. For those of you who are streaming in, I just want to let you know you are in the right place. If you want to tweet questions, we will get them to our speakers. We are just delighted to have these guys here speaking with us today. So I'm going to just take one more minute while people fill their soup bowls and their plates and get a seat. We do try to have hot soup on cold days like this. Sometimes it comes hot, sometimes not. But today it seems to be pretty hot, so. The bowls are big. I know, we usually have cups. For us, it's a surprise. We never know. So if I could just take a minute before I introduce our honored guests, I want just to say a little bit about the history of BioAdvance. Does anybody here know what BioAdvance is? Okay. Anybody have any familiarity with it? There's a bunch of students in it. Do you guys know about this? Okay, good. Well, that's kind of why we do this, so that you get exposed to things that you might not know about. BioAdvance is a really interesting entity that's existed since Tom Ridge's administration. It came into existence then. I'm happy to say that I was on the search committee that hired Barbara Schilberg, who is still the CEO of BioAdvance. It's remarkable in that state government, government gets a pretty bad rap these days, and for a lot of good reasons, but this was one instance where government actually did something that provided very significant value. And BioAdvance, along with the other two greenhouses, one in central Pennsylvania and the other one in Pittsburgh, have really driven an agenda that is predicated on growth, and growth in areas that are hard to grow, particularly in life sciences. And Barbara I know very well. Her colleagues I know less well, but I do know their work, and their work is pretty remarkable. So you won't be sorry that you took the time to come, even if you're not a carrot soup fan. They are really accomplished men who are doing really remarkable things. So we have two speakers. We have Dr. Rick Jones, who will speak first, and we have Shahram Hejazi, or Hejazi, pretty close. But they have incredibly long CVs, and I would do an injustice if I tried to condense it. But Rick is both a physician and an MBA. His charge is to lead medical device development in addition to other biomedical product development and projects. And I'm so sorry, Shahram. I knew the emphasis was at the beginning, I just couldn't quite get it to come out that way. Shahram is a person also with a tremendously deep resume that he has a PhD, spent a lot of time at Princeton as associate professor for entrepreneurship. And again, if I told you everything that these guys have done, I would take up all of the time that they would be speaking. So without further ado, let me bring up Rick Jones, Dr. Rick Jones, who will begin our presentation today. Please welcome him with me.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here and introduce BioAdvance. Our goal today is really to not only talk about our organization, but more importantly, to give you some practical information which then you can take and potentially use in your own efforts, either to develop your proto-businesses or to help others who are trying to do the same thing. So we will give you a little bit of an update on BioAdvance after I talk a bit about what venture capital is and angel capital. And we'll give you a bit of information about what's happening in the VC world, particularly in the region. And then Shahram's going to concentrate really on some practical steps that you can take to improve your odds of raising money if that's something that's a goal of yours. So very quickly, again, I do have a varied background. I've been investing for the last 6 years. But I've also run entrepreneurial companies. I've been in big pharma, and previous to that, I was an academic internist at Penn. My degrees all come from Penn. One thing that I don't put up here, but I think I try to keep in mind as one of the more critical parts of my background is I've been a patient on a few occasions too. So I think we all need to keep that perspective in mind when we look at these opportunities. So what is venture capital? One thing I'll say up front, venture capital is not, and that is, it is not a pool of money out there to support the greatest academic research and to see that scientific advances move forward. Venture capital is a way for private money to make more money. And you've got to keep that in mind as you progress your business plans forward. It's essentially a pool of money that pension funds and other wealthy sources of capital put together to be managed by professional investors in an effort to make more money than they would otherwise make if they put it into bonds or the stock market. These full-time professionals basically are there again. They're employed to make money for these other people. And their funds are the size these days where they generally are writing checks in the millions as opposed to the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And the model is that they pull this money together for a period of about 10 years. They try and invest most of it or make investment commitments in the first few years and then spend the latter half of that fund life getting returns back, which they're returning to their investors. And they expect to be very actively engaged because of the size of their check and the importance of their financing to the company. Oh. So let's contrast that with angel capital. Angel capital is also private money. It's also looking to make a better return than the stock market or bonds. But in this case, it's the wealthy individuals themselves typically who are investing their money. And it's usually not their primary activity. So these individuals are either actively engaged running their own businesses or they have a whole portfolio of different types of investments. This is one little segment of those. And they're not always purely financially motivated, although typically that's one of the larger motivations. You will find some people who are looking because they have special interests, maybe something in their family or something with people that they know of, where they want to make some sort of socially beneficial kind of investment and help early stage companies move forward. And sometimes it's people who've been in the industry and they want to just keep their hand in the game. And this is a way for them to kind of practice what they know and keep going. They don't have a particular fund life, and there's no 10-year horizon for most of these people, although they do obviously want to get out of their investments at some point. And they tend to be relatively passive, I would say, for the average angel investor. There are exceptions to every rule, and if you get money from a large, say, family office or something, oftentimes those people are very used to running their own businesses. They'll want to be very, very active. But there is a difference between the angel world and the venture capital world. You might fund your company with 2 or 3 venture investors where the same amount of money might take 50 angel investors. And managing those 2 types of investor pools is very, very different, as you can imagine. Now, what about BioAdvance? Well, we're sort of neither fish nor fowl in that sense. We're more on the venture capital size and in the size of checks that we write. But we're a nonprofit because we did start as a government economic development investment from the state of Pennsylvania, although we're no longer heavily affiliated with Pennsylvania. But we retain our nonprofit organization. All of our returns are recycled back into our fund, and we retain a mission to promote the biotech economy here in southeastern Pennsylvania, although our geographic boundaries have expanded somewhat as well. We do invest at early stages, so-called seed, Series A, and we retain a very strong focus on human health, so therapeutics, medical devices, digital health. We do have a little bit of research tools as well, but if it's something that's related to the development of products that could be useful for human health, we'll take a look at it. And again, our geographic focus, we're a little larger than southeastern Pennsylvania. We'll look from New York City down to Washington, D.C. these days, although the majority of what we've done is around Philadelphia here. So we started with $20 million from Pennsylvania, but because we've made some returns and we've expanded that pool of money, we've actually been able to invest $47 million. 93 companies altogether that we've invested in, 95 or so products. A huge amount of money that has been raised on top of our money or alongside of our money, over almost $3 billion at this point, and a number of products that have gone through to market and are currently serving patients. So a number of recent examples of our investments to give you an idea of the breadth of things that we'll invest in. Pavella is sort of, if you're familiar with the term 505(b)(2), is a pathway. It's a way of repurposing a currently existing generic drug into a very new formulation for an orphan condition, and they're currently actually in their phase 2 trial. They're a local company. ENB Therapeutics is out of New York, but they're exploiting a brand new mechanism to improve the effectiveness of tumor therapies by improving the infiltration of tumors with tumor lymphocytes. Keratin is a software company that has built a very unique software application to manage breast milk inventories in neonatal intensive care units. They're a local company. Envara Health is a medical food company, also local. They're developing a medical nutritional status for people who have absorption disorders, in particular cystic fibrosis. And then finally, Renovacor, our most recent investment, our new co-investment out of Temple. It's a gene therapy company, our first investment, gene therapy, and they're developing a gene therapy for people who have a monogenic form of heart failure. So a very wide breadth of technologies, mostly local, but it gives you some idea of the types of things that we'll look at. So a little bit about about venture capital and the environment for VC in the U.S. these days. The good news is that the amount of money going into VC, which ultimately may be available to investment in new developing companies, has just skyrocketed over the last few years. And 2019 looks like it's going to be the highest amount yet for healthcare venture capital. This is fundraising now. This is the amount of money going to those professional investors to invest in early portfolios of healthcare companies. I don't know how much you can see about this, but this is the sectors that they invest in. And the green bar here is the biopharma, or basically you could think of it as therapeutics. And you can see that that's by and large the largest sector that people invest in. The smaller bars at the top are diagnostics and tools in purple, and devices in the orange color, and then health tech, which is sort of digital tech, digital health, and so on, has been growing over the last few years. So, in general, there was a bit of a peak in 2018. 2019 numbers are a little bit lower, but historically, the amount of money going into the healthcare sector is actually still at a very high level. And then the number of deals, which is the line at the top, is also at a very high level. So that's all good news for this biotech sector. On the other hand, there's a couple of interesting parts about how that money is being invested and what kind of companies it's being invested in. And here, the top bars represent the smaller size rounds. So the green is rounds under 5 million. That is the total, whatever, seed, Series A, Series B, was less than 5 million, all investors included. The purple bar is the $5 to $10 million range. So I've circled that because you could see it, in Philadelphia historically, we've had a lot of companies that have tried to come out and raise fairly small amounts of money, in that $5 or $6 million range. And yet that's less than 10% of all of the rounds that have been funded by venture capitalists in the last few years. In fact, the largest number of rounds have been these huge rounds of over 50 million that have been particularly popular by venture capitalists. So something to keep in mind when you're thinking about your business plan and the way that you structure your future path. Are you the type who's going to be able to justify investment of a few million to get to some valuable endpoint, and who are those investors going to be, versus do you have something that actually could be a big splash, could maybe be a platform, could have multiple products that might justify and attract the investors, and the majority of whom are interested in these big rounds. So because of that increase in money, there have been more investors. There are more funds that have started up after a weeding out of funds that happened in the crash around 07, 08, 09. There were quite a few funds that couldn't raise money because they lost so much in that period. But new funds have been started because of the inflow of money. But a key characteristic has been the funds that have managed to survive and been around continue to increase larger and larger amounts of money. And think about it, if you have a $250 or $300 million fund and you have to deploy that money in 3 or 4 years, and you figure you can make 3 or 4 investments a year for a total of about 10 to 12 investments, each of those investments is, you've got to be basically committing somewhere between your initial investment and what you're holding on to invest in them later, somewhere around $20 or $30 million. So your first check has to be sizable. And it's actually very difficult to get those kinds of mega funds interested in writing a check for $500,000 or $1 million. They have to put in just as much work to do the diligence in looking at your science and looking at your company and looking at your future as they do to look at a company that's going to require much bigger amounts of capital. So that's an interesting dynamic that's happening. There's also been, as the biotech sector has flourished, there's been a lot of other types of investors who've come in. So now almost every pharma company out there has a corporate venture capital arm. Some of these invest only in things that the company is interested in potentially acquiring in the long run, something that fits into their pipeline, their current footprint. And others are purely financial. They're just investing because they have special expertise in biopharma and they think they can make an excellent return for their corporate CFOs. There are also disease foundations. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is probably the most famous of these, but there are a number of these now and more every year that are making venture investments. We mentioned family offices, all the angel groups. Angels are banding together now to sort of combine their resources, do diligence. Or accelerators will put little amounts of money in. A lot of the health systems, I'm not aware that Jefferson has a VC arm, but there are a number of big health systems, Kaiser, the Blue Cross Blue Shield groups, and there's 4 or 5 very large venture funds from healthcare systems. And then finally, some people have been successful in getting money out of sovereign wealth funds like the one out of Singapore and so on. And then, of course, government funding has been pretty robust, and new sources like BARDA and so on keep popping up. But again, the caveats here that most of this money tends to be concentrated in the areas that have been successful and have grown into big hubs up to this point. So as much as 80% of the standard VC money for biopharma goes to companies that are located in the Boston area and the Bay Area or San Diego, around New York City. And so at BioAdvance, one of the things that we've tried to do as part of our mission, is to really build up the local infrastructure here as a biotech hub, bringing in people like Big 4 Bio and so on to really put Philadelphia more on the map. And of course, our gene and cell therapy companies and some of the others have really succeeded in helping us do that. We expect more of that money to flow here. Part of the issue is that the venture capitalists have also tended to grow up where those big biopharma hubs have been. And so they've tended to locate there as well. So if you know anybody who wants to start a big VC fund here in Philadelphia, let us know. We'd love to wine and dine them and bring them in. So we talked about the capital going up, but a lot of it, the deal flow that you saw there, actually pretty flat over the last few years. huge rounds that account for a majority of the venture capital being invested, and companies that are already huge taking out of that venture capital pool. Oh, the other thing I should note is one thing that can make it difficult for us to compete for some of that venture capital is the venture funds are actually starting their own companies. So they won't look at anything that they haven't decided already by searching the literature and talking with their academic contacts is not interesting. And typically what they'll do is identify some new area, go into the universities, license it all out, and actually start the company in their back offices, as opposed to getting pitch decks and outside pitches the way that historically it's been done. So they also tend to follow what's hot out there. So it's no surprise to you that this top line, oncology, very, very hot. The next line, interestingly, is platform technologies, so things that do have application across a whole wide range of potential products. And then orphan, rare disease, and way down at the bottom here, anti-infectives, which I'm sure you're aware has been having trouble attracting investment for a lot of reasons. But the oncology investment in 2019, $835 million, compared to anti-infectives, $91 million. So 1/10 the amount going into anti-infectives as goes into oncology. Now what's happening in Philadelphia? Basically, we have also trended upward over the last few years in terms of attracting venture capital in the area. So that's very good. It's a little bit lumpy because it depends on big financing rounds that are happening. One thing that's been encouraging is the number of deals have certainly escalated in this region from what they were 10 years ago, although it's been pretty flat the last few years. This is a Series A deals, and again, you can see this is going back to 2008. It's actually not a huge increase, where in the last few years especially, 22, 16, 21, 15, 22. And the funding is very lumpy because, again, of these huge rounds. If we're in a year where a couple of companies get $50+ million rounds, then those numbers really jump up. But just to give you an example that we are now in that league of being able to track these mega rounds. These are a few of the companies that have raised enormous amounts of money in the last few years. You'll recognize names like Teamunity and Passage, Charisma, Cabaletta, which has already gone public, Century, just in the last year, getting $250 million in. So Philadelphia has arrived in that sense of having the technologies and being able to attract those large amounts of money, and hopefully the homegrown money will follow soon. So I'll stop here and let Shahram come up and provide some tips about where to go from here.
Thank you, Rick. So my colleague talked about the landscape and BioAdvance, so you have a good perspective of where we're coming from. I'm going to talk about what to do to sort of maximize your chances of raising fund for your venture. Let's see. Great. So I'm a scientist that turned into business and then entrepreneur. I started 2 companies. I have pitched to almost all the VCs in the Northeast in the last 20 years probably, and raised venture capital for my 2 ventures. About 12 years ago, I joined BioAdvance, so as we call it, join the dark side, although it's not that easy to be on the venture side either. You develop a relationship with the founders and you carry that for 7-8 years, so it is a long-term relationship. I'm also a faculty at Princeton University where I teach 2 courses on entrepreneurship and venture capital. So as Rick mentioned, Pennsylvania does have a healthy base of active investors, but there are other states that are better. We see many companies go up to New York, take Amtrak to New York and pitch and present in New York City. There's definitely more money there. There's some in Boston if you're in biotech. So this gives you an idea of where the investors are focused. Looking at just in our landscape within the Philadelphia, you could see there are investors in all sectors, angels, those who, as Rick mentioned, invest a little bit of capital early on. Then you have the venture side, which includes BioAdvance. And the late stage is probably not too relevant. The late stage invest large amount of capital, $10, $20 million, usually at a much more advanced. And then you have a couple economic development. Ben Franklin is one of them. So looking at the landscape and what we have here, you can see that you certainly could look around here at some of the sort of friendly investors. However, we do recommend going out and looking for capital elsewhere as well. It's just a statistics game. You have more people having money, and that will help you. The second part that you want to remember is that when you're looking for money, you want to identify how much money you want to raise. And venture capital is not a linear process. It's really a non-linear process. Let me give you an example. When I was a scientist, when you're building a science experiment, you build a platform and you build the building blocks on top of that. In a venture capital, when you're looking for an investor, you are looking to invest at the riskiest experiment risk. So you're looking at the entire proposal and you say, what is one experiment that I can run that could break or make this? You fund for that, you develop a funding process for that experiment, and then if that works, you come back and you try it again. And it's sort of an iterative process. So you want to keep that in mind. You want to figure out what is the riskiest sort of milestone in the first year or two, and then develop a budget for that. You don't want to develop a budget for hiring necessarily people or building things of that. Those are linear things. So I think understanding how you raise money and how much you raise for that experiment is key. We usually call it the killer experiment. And then you want to, once you find out how much money you need, you want to approach really all investors, all type of investors. In my course at Princeton on venture capital, I tell my students, venture capital is really the last source of capital you want to go after. You want to go after angels, all the things that Rick listed here. You want to go after angels and all the other sorts of capital that are the foundation grants. And then when you've exhausted all of those, you want to go after venture. So it's important to understand that. And networking is, of course, really important going to things like that. When you want to approach investors, there's a lot of research that you can do. You can go on their website, you can ask about them. There are all types of different investors out there. There are investors that I mentioned invest in early stage. There are investors that invest in biotech and healthcare. There are investors with different risk profile. You really want to do your homework to understand, is that investment firm is the type of investors that you want to go after. There's another dynamic around venture capital. So venture capital are organizations where they raise capital every 5 years, and when they raise that first fund or second or third fund, in the first few years, they're very much under pressure to invest. And then after that, they just monitor and then end up raising another pool of capital. So understanding where the fund is, if the fund even invests actively or not, is also important. So those are some of the questions you want to ask. And of course, investors want to make money. Valuation is important. So where the valuation is also key. So a lot of homework in the background, understanding the venture firm, understanding the investors, the partners, the background. That just gets you in the door much easier. It opens up the conversations at a much more plain level. Now, networking and finding these, of course, are not necessarily easy. I would say the best way to do that is through networking with the people that you know, networking with the investors that you know. So let me give you an example. I think what worked for me as sort of the first-time entrepreneur 20 years ago is that, I had a venture. I identified 10 or 20 investment sort of sources, some VC, some angels. And then I would go and find people who would know them and would say, very specifically, I would say, by the way, do you know this firm or not? Because I'd already done my homework, I knew what I wanted, and I knew sort of a soft or a warm introduction. So that's really important. But again, if you don't have that, you can find people in conferences. I think one of the best ones is Resi conferences in Boston and New York City. They also have one in San Francisco, but that's really good. And you get to see the investors. So that's the other one. And there's a lot of There's a lot of, as I mentioned, education that you can do, self-education, reading some of the newsletters, coming to these events, that will help you to understand sort of the language. So I will go through these three, but I want to make a statement again. The course I teach entrepreneurship, I tell the students, you have to be passionate about the problem, not the solution, right? That's really important. You have to be passionate about the problem, not the solution, because the solution could change, and it will often evolve over time, right? A company, a startup lasts 5, 6, 7, 10 years. You may have to pivot, you may have to modify, you may have to get other technologies married with your technology, you may have to pivot your technology, but the problem is where you want to focus on, so that's really important. So investors, invest for one reason only, right? Traditional investors, to make money. So you have to make sure the math works, and the team is everything, because through that 7, 8, 10 years, the team has to make good decisions. Going a little bit about the problem that you're passionate about, I think you have to really think whether you're addressing a real need. So one of the ways, I'm going to give you an example, one of the ways that we test that is that very often, at least in the digital health world or some other areas, when people have a product, we call some reference customers or some reference clinicians that are interested in that, and we speak with them. And there is a couple ways that the interview comes across. So that person could say, oh, this is a great product, I can use it. Yes, I can see there is really an application for this product, it would improve care. So that's one, that's reasonable. The other sort of answer we get is like, I can't work without this. When can I have this? This will change dramatically my workflow. This will change the landscape of medicine. And I don't care about, sort of some of the details of it, but I really need this, and we can't do without this. So I think, that need is really, really important, not just for investors, but you as entrepreneurs, because you're going to get to that point where your customers can buy 10 different things, and they're going to buy 1 or 2 that is really on top of their list. So identifying that as an entrepreneur is important, because that's where we're going to go after. And of course, then the next question is that, can you protect it? Can you protect it through IP? Is that product complex enough that through your know-how nobody else can make it? So all those things are important. So a barrier to entry for the others to sort of catch up with you. Like I mentioned, investors invest for one reason, and that is to make money. So you have to understand how the math works. Many of the technologies that investors invest in fail. So typically if they invest in 10 things, 6 or 7 will fail. So those 2 or 3 that are remaining have to make a lot of money to pay for all the failures, right? So what we say is that every dollar we invest, we would like to generate approximately 5 or 6 times, $5 or $6. So imagine now this. Imagine someone is giving you $1 million, and you have to create $5 to $6 million of value based on that. How would you spend that? So doing a killer experiment or running and getting some real data, that is important, right? That creates value. Spending it in other ways, even though it may be legitimate, may not create that value. So understanding that economics of capital and money, I think, is really important. So the team is everything, and when a team comes to us, we look at their track record of success in all areas, not just on the technology side, but sometimes you look at the whole person and to see, is this a person that likes to be successful, that is passionate about solving problems? So that history of success in all areas is important. Are they able to motivate people? Are they able to motivate their teams? Even if, very often, an entrepreneur team, even 2, 3 people, don't have all the background, right? They have to hire people. They have to hire people around them. They have to motivate. Very often, they have to motivate thought leaders that are better than them and higher and more knowledgeable. The question is that a kind of a team that can motivate and get other people passionate about what they are? So that emotional intelligence is also quite important. And of course, transparency, trust, those things are important. You are spending 7, 8 years with that person in a company, so, it's a long-term sort of a marriage. Some of the things that we see is that I think are red flags are sort of hiring the person closest to you, hiring your family or neighbor. And the reason for that is just very practical. Again, a company, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, issues come up, you may have to find a different person because of skill set or knowledge. You don't want to be in a situation where you know someone and you've got to have to keep them for other reasons. The expression investors use is that don't hire someone that you are not able to fire at some point, and certainly I think that's important. Also, remember, investors always invest in teams. You at least want to have 2 people, at least 2 people, maybe 3, when you are trying to start a venture. Not only that it's practically important because, an entrepreneurship is a long road that is difficult, so it's nice to have people around you to motivate you, but also you need a diverse set of skill set and knowledge. So I think that's all important. And to an investor, knowing that you've been able to attract other people and be working in a team, this is a teamwork. Entrepreneurship is a teamwork. It's not an individual sport, right? So that's also important for us to see that you can operate inside a team, and I think that's important. So of course we're here to help you. We at BioAdvance, we invest sort of early stage technologies. We can give you some guidance on what kind of investor you want to look at, what sort of the area of landscape is. We always provide feedback. I think Rick mentioned when we get proposals, we review every one of them, usually weekly, and we always provide feedback. You don't usually hear us saying, no, we're not interested. We say, we're not interested if you're not interested for these reasons. If you're interested, of course, there will be an engagement that's going to happen over periods of weeks, months, until we figure out whether we want to invest or not. But we are an active investor, we, even though there are 3 investment individuals in BioAdvance, Barbara, Rick, and I, we have a network of about 50 advisors, many of them that come to our offices on a weekly basis and look at different proposals with us. So, I think that, our responsibility is here to help the community, and we actively try to do that. Again, to get started, I would say look at BioAdvance's website. We try to make it as user-friendly as possible. Look at our background. Look at the type of companies we've invested. And this doesn't just go for BioAdvance. It also goes for any other investor. If you have a company in oncology, try to find investors who are interested in that sector. Why? Because they understand the problem, right? Because they have a network and they're interested to invest, right? So I think it's very important for you to study the website of any investor to see where the expertise are and where the areas are that they can really contribute. And I think all of our emails are actually on the website, so you can contact any of us through that. And I'm going to actually sort of close this with Rick mentioning this because he has been spearheading this.
Sure. One of the resources that I encourage you to use is a Big 4 Bio newsletter, which is a free email that comes in every day, and it sweeps up all the news for the greater Philadelphia region, Princeton to Wilmington, Lancaster, to the Atlantic. I think you'll find it pretty interesting, but one of the key things is anytime a company gets funded, anytime there's a major milestone, anytime somebody does a major partnership, that's usually reflected in press releases and so on, and you'll get a good sense of what's happening where. It'll be a good source of ideas of who to turn to, where you can seek advice, etc. You can just go to www.big4bio.com, sign up right off your phone, and start getting newsletter in the next couple of days. one of the things that BioAdvance did, again, to improve the infrastructure around here. There's a similar newsletter in Boston, one in San Francisco, one in San Diego, and we are in that same league. In fact, there was a year-end summary report the Big Four just did, and we have more companies in San Diego, just a couple less than San Francisco, and a very similar amount of funding and so on. So we are right up there in the big leagues.
Thank you.
So we're ready to take some questions. The graphics on that are fabulous, and it's so, we have to make sure we get everybody on the list. Who's got a question? Adam? Yeah. I figured you were sitting right in front so you could be close to the microphone.
Yeah, that's basically my bad eyes. You talked about the 505(b)(2) mechanism. Could you expand a little bit about that and also discuss if it also may apply in the diagnostic space?
So the diagnostics, I'm not sure about, maybe Shahram, you know about that. But 505(b)(2), for those of you who don't know, it is essentially a way to and have an abbreviated pathway to FDA approval by taking...
Your mic. You get a picture.
It's supposedly on, but...
Supposedly.
Sure. So 505(b)(2), for those who don't know, is an abbreviated approval towards FDA, abbreviated pathway towards FDA approval, where you take a molecule that has already been in an approved product and reformulate it, so that the major difference is just that it's in a different formulation, oftentimes administered via different route. So say something was oral and now it's been reformulated into a cream or ointment, as in the case of Pavella, or something was injected and now it is a pill, or et cetera, et cetera. And the advantage is that you can oftentimes use the safety and pharmacologic database of the approved molecule as part of your application, so you don't have to sort of repeat a lot of those studies. Now, the problem with 505(b)(2)s is that there's a couple of issues. One is that the molecule, by definition, almost has to be generic. Usually, if there's an approved product that's not generic yet, the developer will have IP protection around that molecule. You won't be able to develop it yourself. So it's generic. That means it can be substituted with the generic form out there. So you have to be really careful about your cool new way of administering this, that somebody can't just substitute the existing generic for your new formulation. So in the case of, say, a skin patch, is it really going to capture market share? Because you're going to have to price it as a new branded product. It's going to be more expensive than generic. Is it really going to hold up against the very cheap pill, et cetera, et cetera? So those are some of the issues that people face. That being said, there are very successful examples of people who've been able to do a completely different route of administration, take advantage of the abbreviated pathway, and find that it's very difficult for any substitution to occur.
And just to complete that does not exist in diagnostics. Diagnostic usually goes through CDRH and FDA, and a little equivalence of that does not work for diagnostics.
So, two unrelated questions. First question, when BioAdvance actually does a round, are you normally the lead investor, or are you one of the junior partners in a round? And then the second is, because I think there are a lot of people here that are interested in getting financing, what's one of the things that you commonly see in presentations to you that can guarantee that people won't get money?
So I'll answer the first one, and I'll give you the pleasure of answering the second one, because that's really juicy. So we will do either. We historically have sort of been a single investor and provided sort of written checks in the $250,000 to say $500,000, $750,000 range. by ourselves or put in a convertible note. But more recently, we've also participated in syndicates, either as a lead or as a follow-on investor. So we're flexible in that regard. When we do come into a syndicate, part of our services to the company that we're interested in is to try and make connections to other investors who would join us in a syndicate like that. So we can do either.
Yeah, and on the second part, I actually have a talk called 10 Things to Do Not to Raise Capital. So I talk about all the things we've seen over the years, but particular to BioAdvance and particular to this crowd around biotech, I think one of the things that really turns off everyone is a lack of scientific rigor. So making scientific statements that are not proven, that are not solid in science. Almost everybody around our investment table is either a PhD or an MD, right? So we are all scientists at some level. So I think that's really important. I would say on the EQ, on the personal level, it's almost the same thing as well. It's sort of a lack of self-awareness. Not everyone, including us, knows everything. I think being humble is also helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting talk. One question is, what is the working relationship between the startup and the venture group as far as resources that the startup can get from a venture group? And what is kind of like the reporting structure, milestone structure, things like that?
So it varies a little bit depending on the investor that you're dealing with. So I mentioned that there are some of the VCs now, and a few of the prominent names in this regard are Atlas and Flagship and Third Rock, all up in Boston, but there are others with similar kinds of models. These are people who basically develop the companies in their back offices using people that they employ as entrepreneurs in residence or venture partners, et cetera. And they, from the beginning, basically shaped the course of the company and the management and so on. So obviously, if you license your technology into an organization like that, you can expect them to be extremely hands-on. For most of the traditional VCs, and I guess we would be in that camp, our involvement has to be a little bit less. We're not staffed to provide ongoing operational support to companies. We do provide advice via the board, and also we're happy to get on the phone. And Shahram is extremely involved in a number of his companies who are constantly asking for advice. But each of us have a number of companies that we're responsible for, and we simply can't be day-to-day management in that case. Now, in terms of milestones, the milestones are the basis for the investment. So we invest, as Shahram said, to get a company to a particular spot where it's de-risked its project and gotten a lot more valuable in that regard. And so we pay very close attention to milestones in our interactions with the company. They're absolutely critical.
No, I think well put, just a data point. Yeah, I mean, I speak to my entrepreneurs, my CEOs, if not every week, at least once every 2 weeks. But it's more of an advice rather than actually doing something.
Hi. So I have one question. Basically, in academic setting, what do we do? We do a lot of exciting research. We publish papers, but we are not able to go the next level. Next level means translating it as a proof of concept, like from bench to clinical. So there is a huge gap. So is there how, let us suppose I am a researcher also. So if we form a team and we have solid hypothesis through our innovations or Jeffersons, so is it possible for the seed research, for the proof of concept? So do you, the venture capitalists, to check that kind of hypothesis for proof of concept studies, and do you prefer, or do you have or do you only prefer have somebody established company already there? They are developing their pipelines. Which phase basically do you want to entertain? For the beginner, let us suppose I want to be entrepreneur. Right. So I have only this stage.
Sure. So since I've been around for 12 years, let me just give you some history that may be helpful. Where we have seen academicians successful in in entrepreneurial ventures are when they have paired up with somebody in the industry who understands the problem very well. Because academicians usually sort of have the solution or the technology. So I think one way to start would be to network your science with industry, because they really understand the market, they understand. So, and then at that point, when we have a team, someone who understands the problem, someone who has the solution, we will pay for everything. We will pay for an experiment. You don't even have to have a company, in fact. We will have an agreement with the university on a contract to pay for a proof of concept experiment. That's an easier problem. I think the main issue is that, do you have a team? What's going to come after that? What happens after that experiment is successful? And is that experiment is the one that is solving a problem? So I would suggest networking sort of with the outside.
Great talk, gentlemen. Could you share with us one of your exits and perhaps some of the characteristics that made it a success?
Okay, so since I've been there, I'm trying to think that I guess we've had a couple of recent successes now with companies that have, after many years, been able to go public. So one of the nice dynamics of the current biotech environment is that there's there continues to be now for the last few years, it's been in the history of the industry, it's actually been a very long window when IPOs for companies that are relatively early stage in their development have been possible. And of course, when a company goes public, they're selling their shares to the public. All their shares become marketable, even the shares that have been heretofore, paid for with private money. And after a certain number of months, we can then go to the market and sell our shares to other people who are interested in that company on the public market. So we've had one company recently we funded, 14 years in the past, who had some very good phase 2 data on an antidepressant and was able to go public on the back of that. When the lockup period ended, shares had gone up quite a bit, and we were able to exit at that point. We have had other companies that have been sold in trade sales, that is to other people in their industry who are interested in their particular products, and they get a price for their company, and since we own a piece of that company, a piece of that price comes back to us. So I don't know if you have any other specific examples.
Well, I mean, I can give you an example in the digital health world. We had a company, as I mentioned, it was a team that was a sort of a technical team that came together and attracted a serial entrepreneur who really knew how to build a sort of a development team, not just a research team, but a development team. They came together. The problem they identified was pretty important. They actually pivoted on the solution and the product a few times, but the problem they were trying to solve was they were able to solve. So that was one thing. The other thing is that let's talk about the exit a little time. So in these scenarios, when a company is sold to another larger company, that doesn't happen overnight. That happens over a few years. So what they did right is that they start developing a relationship. In fact, we've had this in 3 of our exits. They start developing a relationship with the potential acquirer, and the acquirer felt more comfortable about the technology, about the team, about the product. So that was a really smooth thing. So I think that's a good takeaway.
So this will be our last question.
Could you comment on the establishment of the management team, the compatible, supportive, qualified board, and the financial reporting and information you're going to give to your potential sources of money?
Well, in terms of establishing the management team, I think there are 2 things that are absolutely critical. One is to get people who, number one, are experts at what they do, but number 2, know what they don't know and respect the fact that they need to get the types of, the expertise to cover the gaps in whatever it is. And so that's the type of person. And the third thing is there has to be a fair amount of EQ, as Shahram mentioned. People have to be able to get along, to understand it's not a single person kind of activity. It really does take a team. No matter how brilliant the individuals are in that, nobody knows everything that needs to be done. In terms of finances, all I would say is you're going to have to be absolutely transparent with your investors. There can't be anything hidden, obviously. They're going to be, they're as much of a partner as your IP lawyer or your, as your chemist or whoever else you're dealing with. So.
Yeah, and I just would add that you need to provide quarterly financial statements to your board, and sometimes if the company is farther along, you have to provide annual audited financials. So those things are also formally done, but it's never a surprise very often because you're very transparent often with the board, with the investors. So those are just formal reportings.
Please join me in thanking our guests today.